Welcome back to the Woven Energy podcast on Real Practical Shamanism with me, Joseph Sikora, and Damon Smith. So, Damon, we've got a bit of a general interest episode lined up today. We were having a chat, weren't we, a few weeks ago about what we can do over Christmas and New Year. Pretty cool general interest episodes around those themes. And the last one was quite interesting, all on Santa Claus. You know, I come to you sometimes with bright, misty-eyed optimism.
I hadn't noticed, Joe. You do indeed.
I have this mystical, like, Damon, please explain this to me. And then I get the smackdown. So there we go. But it was a really good episode. It's good fun. We also talked about an episode on stone circles relating to the new year, our calendar, the stars, you know, all this kind of stuff. Because I remember you talking a few times about this back in the day, and it's kind of all disappeared from my head. But I remember it being fascinating. So before we get cracking on that, Damon, we have some patrons to thank. So do you want to take over?
Yes, indeed. We have two new patrons, Benjamin Ford and Stefan Topolsky. Thank you very much, guys. It's always great to have new patrons. I really appreciate the support that you get, all of the patrons that you guys show us. And it's been a source of inspiration and just general good feeling about the fact that we did this. As we might have mentioned many times, Joe put a lot of effort into persuading me to do this thing in the first place. I was far from keen on doing the Woven Energy podcast when he first raised the idea with me. And, you know, I'm kind of glad that he did. And not only was I surprised by the number of listeners that we get, I've been shocked by the number of people who want to actually help us further than just being a listener. It's absolutely fabulous. And I really, really appreciate it, guys. So thanks very much to Benjamin and Stefan.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've said a few times that this is a passion project for us, so it just keeps us on track and keeps us going, doesn't it?
Yes,
so
indeed.
Thanks a lot, guys. If you want to support us on Patreon, then you can go to patreon.com/woven energy, right? There's no dash, it's just woven energy.
Yeah, that's right. All one word, yeah.
Yeah. And any support is greatly appreciated. You will get several perks, depending on which tier you choose. So you can go over there and see what takes your fancy. So, stone circles, Damon, the new year, shamanism, stars, all this kind of stuff. Stonehenge.
Yes. Well, we need to be careful on this one, don't we? Because this could easily end up being Stone Circles Part 1, couldn't it? And we probably don't want to go down that rabbit hole. It is so I know where to start with this. I mean, we've been talking a lot about spirit dance. We've done quite a few episodes on spirit dance now. And stone circles, as people may know, some of the stone circles that exist in the world, and they are all over the world, are very, very old by the standards of our perception, if you like, our modern perception. You know, we're talking, even the ones just near me, you're talking 3,000 to 5,000 years ago that these things were erected as stone circles. But obviously before that, there was something else, because these stones, I mean, you may be aware, I mean, the most famous one of all is Stonehenge, isn't it? And some of the blocks in Stonehenge, you can't just imagine sort of picking them up with your bare hands and digging a hole in the ground and sticking them in. You know, there's some serious engineering has gone into moving those super heavy stones. I mean, even some of the smaller stone circles in the UK, I mean, Castlereagh and places like that. I used to hang out quite a lot there when I was younger. Some of the stones there are 15 tons, you know, so it's like, I can't remember off the top of my head how heavy the ones at Stonehenge are, but the thing is although to us they are old, actually they're the end of something. They're not the beginning of something. They were what something else developed into. What was that something else? That was groves. And, you know, we talk about groves a lot on here. We've talked about groves a lot recently in terms of spirit dance. And what does a grove start as? Well, a grove starts as an area in which a shaman is practicing their technique. Spirit dances has obviously been a major technique associated with groves and stone circles historically, because in Cornwall where I live, the stone circles here, and for instance, one's called Dance Mayon, and also they're referred to as the dancing stones. This Cornish word dancia. They are associated with dance. They're associated with spirit dance, and always have been. But they weren't stone originally. They were, well, first of all, they were just an area. If you're a shaman and you want to start practicing spirit dance, one of the things that you want to do is keep moving, stopping. The old Tyrak is not something that experienced shamans tend to enjoy. They want a continuous movement. And so often what you'll do is you'll see there'll be a focal point around which the shaman will move as they're doing their spirit dance. If you're just in the woods, that focal point might be a tree, or it might be a stone, it might be some other geographic feature. But you're moving continuously around, and because you can circle around that, you can make, you can go round and round and round, Elcht, as we call it in Mongolian, that continuous circling and change direction, Egach and various other techniques and stuff that you can do to change direction. You can go forever in a circular or elliptical fashion around a central point. Now, if you practice your spirit dance a lot, as I do, if you just naturally do that in some area and you use the same area a few times, you'll start to see that your feet tend to trample out the ground and it starts to make a kind of a circle. We often with a focal point at the center of the circle. And also you might either deliberately clear or generally clear the underbrush from that area, and you end up with if you're in the woods, as I am often, you end up with sort of a grove area that just comes naturally out of your practice. So you can see that this idea of a circle is something that goes back to the very, very oldest times, long before 5,000 years ago, when these things that we call, or even 10,000 or 15,000 years ago, in some areas of the world, when these things that we now call stone circles first appeared, I associate the stone circles actually with the rise of the miasma in human society, with the very earliest start of human civilization. They were replacing something organic, a ring of trees, which are organic and changing through the centuries, with something almost unchanging, which, they typically will pick a stone that's very hard wearing to, metamorphic rocks and this type of stuff to make these stones. And the stones, in a way, are replacing the wood. And they may have started that replacement process with natural trees and natural rocks that would tend to make an area that's a bit like a grove or circle. They would start by replacing those things with actual posts in the ground, wooden posts, because they were a lot easier to manage than these huge blocks of stone. But then as their agriculture and their size of their societies and their exoteric religions started to develop, they would want something more permanent. If you like, the world's first churches, for all those kind of rituals that those sort of exoteric religions engage in, which are sort of ritualized versions of pre-existing shamanistic techniques. And they would want a central focal point for that, and they don't want to have to repair it too often. And obviously making it out of stone reduces your repair or your maintenance bill on your church quite considerably. And so I often think about this. I mean, I love the stone circles. There's some that I'm familiar with. I've been to a lot of stone circles because I love the things in the UK, but there's some that I absolutely adore. Stonehenge, incidentally, is not one of them. But the feeling in those areas, I'm in most of those cases, the ones that I really, really love, I'm convinced they were not stone circles to begin with. I think they were pre-existing groves. And then at some time in the dim and distant past to us, they've been demarcated in a permanent way. Whereas originally, the shamans tend to decorate their groves in various different ways. Like there's the Nawa ropes that are used in Japan to demarcate these white twisted ropes that tend to demarcate sacred space. And you can just weave flowers and things between the tree branches, or all kind of different ways to decorate your grove. But when you want a permanent institution, you start thinking about getting a lot of people involved and doing some more heavyweight stuff. I mean, as I did in my own garden. I have serious respect for those guys because we put just 3 standing stones in my garden for my spirit dance practice. Only 3. And they're not exactly the size of, I mean, they're pretty big, but they're not exactly the size of the ones at Stonehenge or anything, or even Castle Rig. That was a lot of work using heavy machinery, you know. so I take my hat off to these guys who actually did it. But as I said, I do see the stone circles, the development of them, as something that was associated with the development of the miasma.
So, is there any particular reason why a shaman would pick a location as a grove, or is it just somewhere that looks nice to do some practice?
Yeah, so there's lots of reasons. It's hard to put into words really, because you know shamanism's all top line, isn't it? It's not baseline, and there's tends to be a good feeling in some of these places, and I think that there are areas in the world where I'm trying to think of how to put this without getting too woo-woo about it. But
well, me too.
There are areas where there is an uplifting feeling. Yeah. So if if you stand in one place, sometimes I've described that uplifting feeling. It's a bit spirituality, but in a different sense. It's like a sense that you're standing up on a high mountain, looking out over a beautiful valley below you. You have a sense of elevation. I mean, you can literally be standing on high mountain. That's why mountains are also fantastic places to do your shamanism. But we're talking about stone circles today. That feeling of standing out, looking over a valley. There are places in the world that are not standing way up high, looking over a valley below you. They are just standing on normal ground or some slope of a hill or slope of a moor or something like that, like Bodmin Moor, just near me. But they still give you that same buoyed up feeling like you're lifted up into the clouds. And I think they've picked, from what I've seen, they've picked places that are like this for their groves, as I do. And in a way, there's also another thing to this. Sometimes there are natural features that do tend to support that kind of feeling. One of the interesting things is that near where I live, there's the very, very famous Hurlers stone circles. There are 3 stone circles. I mean, it's literally walking distance from my house. I go up there a lot.
Yeah, that's where we went, right? The Hurlers.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the reasons why I picked the location of my house was the Hurlers. So it was a big reason. And they're well known. People come and visit them. I mean, they're not quite as well known as Stonehenge, but if you come to the car park at Minions in the middle of the summer, you'll see an awful lot of people coming to see the Hurlers and other things that are up there. And so here's an interesting fact. A lot of sorry, mate.
I was just going to say they do tend to. I mean, if you think about what they are, they're just a bunch of they're just a bunch of stones in the ground, but yet they seem to attract people from all over the country.
Me included.
People want to come and see them and
yeah, absolutely.
So there's something about them.
Yeah, and so one of the things that I've found with the Hurlers, I mean, the thing that's impressive about the Hurlers is people think of a stone circle as a circle, and there has been a bit of snobbishness in people the small number of people who do study stone circles. The real stone circles are these very few that are perfectly circular. And I'm like, that's nonsense.
They got the protractors out, haven't they?
No, it's just that you really, really don't get it. It's more like it's an enclosing space, but it's also open. It's like open to all the directions. It's a focal point. And also, obviously, you practice in spirit dance, as we've said before, you want a lot of variety in your technique. And if you're moving around, this is what I use my standing stones for. If you're moving around physical objects that amplify the effect that the environment is having. Obviously, there's the ground. You don't want this; it's not flat, and so you're moving over the ground, and you got your Bat Tosheltin Guchach, your Borchik Hat Harate. Within the dance that you're doing, the variations in the ground give you a lot of feedback, and they give you a lot of impetus, so that you can create the weave and dissolve within the environment, which is what a shaman's trying to do, energetically speaking. But putting physical obstacles there that you can weave in and out of, that you can weave in and out of these wonderful stones, standing stones, and stone circles, which would also be, wooden posts at one point in time, and before that, just trees. That adds an awful lot of variety to your dance in a way. And adding variety to spirit dance is something that you get a taste for, you get a flavor for. And it's an obvious way to do it. Also a lot of stone circles have a sort of focal point at the center. Some of them even have a central stone. So obviously, because there's a demarcated sacred space, if you like, within which you're practicing your spirit dance, there is a center to that, or a central area to that, where you can, sometimes, like I said, there is physically a stone there, which is like the focal point. That can also, if it's a physical stone, can also add a lot of variety. Obviously, you can't pass through the stone, but you can pass around it, through it, between the stones, wind in and out of them, all this kind of stuff. And obviously, you're doing this in a state of chillicity, so it has to be done at a very, very essential level. You can't logicalize your way around these stones, because as soon as you start thinking about where you're going, then the whole chillicity breaks down. So it does add a lot of flavor. And as we said, if you think of spirit dance as a radar for nature, the more complexity you put into the weave, in Guruch, the more complexity you put into the dance, the more you can interact with nature. But that's also, of course, that's true with trees. I mean, in some ways, trees are better than stones. But what I was going to say about the hurlers was a couple of things. First one is that what counts as a stone circle? I mean, these sort of stone circle snobs who want them to be perfectly circular, and the best ones are perfectly circular and stuff, that's just total nonsense. You want irregularity. You want some aspect of naturalism in it. And you can see stone circles like the three at the hurlers. The central stone circle is a big, wide open circle with a big flat area. I mean, it's wonderful when you're there alone. You need to live here to be there alone, basically, because if you get a chance to come down here, 500,000 other people do, to go and see that particular one, the central circle. But the northern circle is a bit more sort of squashed. It's a bit more sort of an oval kind of shape, and the southern circle is all broken up. It's still even vaguely a circle. And so you have a choice of how beautifully regular. If you come to the hurlers, you've got a choice of how beautifully regular your circle is for your spirit dance. And you can move between them, obviously. And it's a massive wide open space. So it's what you'd say is, if you want a stone circle for wide open movement, with easy movement, free movement, wherever you're going, to really lose yourself in the dance, really, really lose yourself in the dance for long, long periods, then the hurlers are just fantastic for that. But there's also a couple of standing stones nearby. They're called the pipers, and you can use that for various shamanistic techniques and exercises. But what I was going to say is that, like a lot of stone circles around the world, not just in the UK, but around the world, the hurlers are south of an important or imposing geographic feature known as the cheese ring, which is an amazing area of natural stone formation. And the location south of that falls through to other stone circles as well. A bit further over on the moor, there's one called Fernacre stone circle, which is, again, it's been placed due south of a major geographic feature called Rough Tor. And again, you see again and again with these stone circles, it's called Fernacre, that stone circle, and they are not placed randomly. They're placed in a place where the environment speaks to you. To the east, you've got another kind of hill, dramatic geographical features called Brown Willie, kind of strange name. And to the south, there's another hill, and then up to the north, you've got this very imposing rough tor. And so it's almost a cross, except that the placement has been such that I guess they couldn't find exactly 4 perfectly north, south, east, west hills all lined up. So what did they do over to the west? They created another stone circle at roughly the same sort of distance as these other hills are from the Fernacre one. It's called Stannon's Stone Circle, another great stone circle. And so a lot of thought has gone into the place. Not thought in terms of thinking, let's work it out, but in terms of the places where the environment speaks to you. That this is how they've been located. And as I said, I believe that location process of these highly significant stone circles, based on the strength of that feeling that you get in a lot of them, for instance, Fernacre, for instance, the Hurlers, Dan's Main as well as another one. And also in Cumbria, if you ever, these are all in Cornwall, the ones I'm talking about, but if you're up in Cumbria, Castlereagh is phenomenal, just phenomenal. These stone circles are all, I believe they are later developments of, first they found the grove, first they found this amazing place to practice their spirit dance that enabled them to commune with the natural environment around them very powerfully. Then they demarcated, maybe just dressing it up with a few, branches and leaves or whatever, and then started sticking posts in the ground. And eventually, maybe after thousands of years, maybe after tens or hundreds of thousands of years, once they became more organized after the development or just before the development of exoteric religion and agriculture, they got the wherewithal and the number of people that they could support to start sticking these huge stones in the ground. And that's pretty much where we are today. I had an idea. I was thinking, what could me and you do for a YouTube channel? I don't mean like Pure Academy, but I was like, what could we put on a Woven Energy YouTube channel? I was sort of thinking some of the.
Oh, we have one, right?
I know, but we just put the podcasts on, don't we? We don't actually. Yeah. I was thinking, could we put some extra content on there? I was thinking, I don't know if you've seen them. And this is more of it's a semi-joke, but it's more of a thing for heretics as well. But have you seen these things on YouTube where there's some guy has a channel where all he does is he gets a thing in a box that he's bought out of a shop, and then he films himself taking it out the box. There's a whole word for it. It's called unboxing. I'm like, what?
Unboxing.
Unboxing, yeah. It's become a whole genre. And I thought, could we do something like that with nature? Unboxing nature. And just show people like the wonderful things that are in nature. For instance, that to me are far more, I don't know, is treasurous a word? They have more of the flavour of treasure than anything you buy in a box out of a shop. And a great example of that is the stone stack at the Cheese Ring. This is this geographical feature that's north of the Hurlers. There's this amazing stone stack there, which is all natural. There's nobody's put it there. It's just a phenomenal thing. And you could use that for the scent. Although it's on a bit of the slope of the Cheese Ring, it's awkward to move around. It's like advanced spirit dance, probably. You can do it around that. The thing is wonderful, and it's so breathtaking, and it impresses the hell out of me way more than the man-made great uprights at Stonehenge, for instance. It just makes them look a bit rubbish. And so that kind of unboxing nature was an idea that I had, and maybe we can include a few stone circles and stuff like that. Anyway, it's just a thought.
It's really interesting how you're talking about Stonehenge like that, because I do get it. It's like you're talking about. It's like stone circles are churches. They've become churches from what came.
Well,
before,
especially
right?
Stonehenge,
and Stonehenge is like York Cathedral,
the granddaddy of them all, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely right. I
never really thought about it like that. I mean, it's very impressive, but I guess it's impressive in the way that the York Minster.
To be honest, it's one of my least favourite stone circles. There's lots of things in the environment around it on Salisbury Plain that are quite impressive.
The reason I wanted to, partly wanted to do this episode, but without, and I don't want to sound too woo, but I remember going to one stone circle. It was down there south of the Pennines, Yorkshire Pennines, and like you were saying, which is why I asked why shamans would pick these areas. But I do remember just being at the stone circle, and there is just this sort of feeling which comes over you, and I hate talking like this because it's like, oh yeah, whatever, but it's like you stood there. I remember it was like half an hour went by, and I was just stood there, and it was just a pleasant, nice feeling.
So let me give you an example. You finish what you said, mate, then I'll give you an example.
No, go for it.
Okay, so here's something, right, to show that the environment was involved in these things. I mean, also later, of course, you got the rise of exoteric religion. You got all this stuff that, as above, so below, all those kind of ideas. Obviously, a lot of these stones were physically placed, sometimes with like a heel stone or alignment stone. They were also used for celestial observation. Yeah. So I'm not saying that didn't happen. It sure did. I'm just suggesting that's not where it started. Yeah. The Fernacre stone circle that I was talking about, which is quite near to me, is south of, as I said, it's due south of this geologic feature called Rough Tar, but the Hurlers are due south of this impressive geologic feature called the Cheese Ring. And, even if we go around the world, just talking about stone circles in the UK, but the Oshoro stone circle in Japan is just south of a very impressive conical kind of hill that looks quite unusual. So and you see this not with all of them, but with a lot of them. And also that feature of the, one of the ones that's the most, I guess, dramatic in Cornwall is Bosquenun, which is quite far down the peninsula. It's right down towards Land's End. It's at a point where you can see there's lots of geographic stuff coming towards you. It's almost, if you look at it on the map, it's almost like a starfish. Stuff, people, roads, rivers, streams, all that kind of stuff. And they're almost like focal points. And this is one of the ones that in the middle of it, it's got a central stone as well. But you can also see the effect of the exoteric religion developing. As human beings start anthropomorphizing the underlying spirits within nature, start turning them into human beings, they start turning these stones into representations of their new gods that they've just invented. And what's very, very interesting, the greatest example of that is Çatalhöyük, right, which is in Anatolia, which again, they're enclosed sort of half-buried stone circles, where the stones are literally carved in the shapes of gods, if you like, or, underlying spirits within nature being anthropomorphized as religion moves from an esoteric sense into an exoteric sense within their society. And this one at Bosquenun, the central stone, has 2 feet sort of carved, at some point in time, have been carved into the bottom of it to try and make it look like it's a god as well, So this stone it was once a stone and is once a central focal point, but now it's the god. Who knows what it was called? We're talking about thousands of years ago, right? But, that they're anthropomorphizing these things. But that's, incidentally, if you get a chance to visit Bosquenun, that's another great one for doing a bit of spirit dance. If you do get right down the peninsula, at Cornwall, another great place. And then not so far from there, again in this kind of geographic locality, is Dansmain, which is another really nice stone circle, another great one because a lot of flat area in the middle for doing your spirit dance. That's the one that literally means the dancing stones or the dancing ladies. And there's an old legend about these things in Cornwall. That also, they're on the edge, aren't they? They're on the edge of shamanism and they're on the edge of exotericism. As the church developed, now I'm talking about the Christian church, they had to recognize that these things were there in the community, and the community were bought into these stone circles as focal points. So they couldn't just discard them. So what they did is they came up with a bit of a nasty explanation of why they were there. And they were basically said to be circles of women who used to go out and dance in nature, witches and stuff, who had been turned to stone by God as a punishment for their pagan ways. And so you can see how the original purpose gets distorted. And the hurlers is even worse, because hurling is now a bit of a sport down in Cornwall. But the hurlers, there's a large number of stones at the hurlers, and this was people who were turned to stone for playing hurling, the game of hurling, on the Sabbath. They broke the Sabbath and played hurling. So they all got turned to stone. And it's
got a lot to answer for, hasn't it, religion?
Yeah. And hurling's quite an interesting. It's you can see the shamanistic origins of hurling. I mean, it's very sport-like in this day and age, and you can see that the church has twisted it over hundreds of years here, But you can see the spirit dance in it. When you're dancing and doing your spirit dance, some of the times you want to use something to add more variety. I mean, the obvious thing is your drum, right? The drum, it adds a lot more variety into the spirit dance than just doing it without a drum. But sometimes you look to go further than that. I don't know if you remember, we used to use like a shepherd's crook in the woods. Were you involved in that? Was that before your time?
No, this has become a bit of a legend in talking circles, yeah.
Yeah, so we used to do that
Damon once had us stood around in a circle throwing a shepherd's crook to each other.
Yes, and none of us were turned into stones, as I recall, by God. We definitely did that on a Sunday for sure. And so we used to use a shepherd's crook to add variety to the dance. And what's happening there is it's about Burachikhartate. You go into Chelicity, and as soon as you start throwing a shepherd's crook around, or in the case of hurling, it's a very hardwood ball encased in silver. So the ball that's used in hurling in modern times, I suspect it wasn't always like that. One time it was probably a rock. It is very, very, it's going to hurt if it hits you. So the issue there is it forces you to stay in that sort of state of Burachikhartate. One of the interesting features of the hurling game, when it's played competitively, is that it's very spirit dance. You can see where it came from, spirit dance. People are moving around, they're throwing the ball or rock or whatever it was, or staff or shepherd's crook or whatever it was between each other as they're moving, as they're doing their dance. You still see that in modern hurling. But you need to be careful because that thing hurts. And one of the things that we used to have to be careful with that shepherd's crook, the actually one that we used, is it was steel shod at the bottom. And if anyone threw it at you with tip first, the bits first, that was going to really hurt, Paul will tell you stories about that. But the issue is that those things also add richness, because you have to be at a certain place at a certain time as the ball or staff or whatever, it comes to you and goes away from you. And you can see 2 or 3 more shamans doing spirit dance, flinging a thing, whatever it is, between each other and catching it out of the air, which is still a feature of hurling to this day. If one team throws the ball and another person manages to snatch it out the air, then that swaps sides and the other team's got the ball. And they say that this idea, because one of the other things there's lots of different versions of hurling in the past. One of the versions of it was that you could only throw backwards. If for instance, it's all about boundaries, right? In a lot of these Cornish towns, one of the rites they would do is walk the boundary of the town. And then one team has to get it the ball into a goal, which is like a carved stone in the middle of the town. Another team has to get it outside the boundary of the town somewhere, but it's very rich movement. You can see like the shepherd's dance, because the whole town is basically your playing field, right? The whole place, the whole parish or whatever. Somebody said one of the places, like St. Columb, was it 25 square kilometers of playing field for a single game, It's like, this is serious stuff, But they say that, and also some of the versions have a thing like, it's almost like wrestling, where the ball falls. It's not clear who's got the ball, and they're sort of like they're doing like a scrum, like a rugby scrum, to try and get it. And you can see how it's almost like wrestling, isn't it? And you can see how that serves a double purpose. It makes the martial capabilities of the people in the locality. I mean, if you go pre-Christian here, so we're going back hundreds or thousands of years, it increases the martial prowess of the men involved, or women involved, if they were probably involved at one point in the dim and distant past, while at the same time allowing them to practice what is effectively a spiritual activity. But of course, as soon as Christianity arrived, the whole thing had to become just a sport, in inverted commas. and a bit of a laugh, you know. But yeah.
Is this purely because of control? I mean, what would they have against it?
Well, it's not one of their religious rituals, is it? Therefore, it would be challenging. You know, your religious life in an exoteric religion is demarcated by the church. The church knows better than you do how you should live your religious life. If you think that things like wrestling can be spiritual activities, then, or hurling, for instance, can be a spiritual, or dancing can be a spiritual activity, then you are challenging what the church says. The church says, you know, the mass and the services that they do and all that kind of, that's your religious life, what they decree. And other things are not your religious life, they're just your normal life. And so, whereas in shamanism, virtually ends up everything that you do in your entire life becomes a sort of your spiritual life, you know, from standing at the bus stop to weaving in and out of stones to throwing a shepherd's crook around. It's all the same stuff, you know, to organizing or helping teams to be inspired in the workplace. It all becomes the same thing. And I was just talking about this morning. I was doing a Kempo class this morning, and we're just talking about it in terms of, you know, what's the difference between Kempo and Shingi and Tai Chi and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, well, and my answer to that is always, well, other people seem to see a difference, you know, but I just find it irritating, you know. Obviously, you have to talk to people in a language that they understand, especially if they don't know anything about what it is that you're doing. But so I said we should just have a class. Half jokingly, I said we should just have a class called Stuff. Yeah, so we do stuff, you know. And then I think Tamo said, "Why don't you just call it martial arts?" And I says, "I'm bound to get somebody who said." That's spirit dance. It's not martial arts, you know. So you can see if I just call it spirit dance, somebody will say, "Oh, that's martial arts. It's not spirit dance," you know. And that's the problem, isn't it? It's the underlying assumptions that people have about life, and it extends into the idea of stone circles. When you look at a stone circle, if you're in an exoteric frame of mind, you might come up with some nonsense like, "Oh, that one's perfectly circular. It must be authentic," you know. Just, you know, well, first of all, the Victorians moved a lot of these stones around. You know, I'm sure a lot of them are still in the same sort of place. They probably, you know, what the Victorians were like, they probably had tidied a few of them up. So the ones that are perfectly circular, they were probably ones that the Victorians messed with, you know.
Suspiciously made.
And so I think what they are ultimately, I think what they are is they have been generations and generations of people, starting with shamanic groves, moving through more shamans who wanted a more permanent kind of structure into more exoteric religion, and then over time into myths and legends in that kind of transition. And the meaning that they have to each subsequent generation throughout those thousands and thousands of years has changed, has been modified as the zeitgeist of their society developed, either be it backwards or forwards, who's to say, but as it changed, their interpretation of what they are has changed. And, you know, I could easily see myself, if I wanted to create an exoteric religion, the stone circles are a great thing to base it on, right? I could go up to the hurlers and I start giving all the gods of the stones names and stuff and start writing up what their particular attributes are and stuff, and when you should, which Tuesday of the new year you should worship them on and all this kind of stuff, you know. They're a great base for that. And I believe that a lot of generations of people did do that. I mean, for instance, a lot of people thought it was the Celts who'd put these things together. I mean, that they're associated with modern Druidry down here in Cornwall, but they far predate that stuff. They're just by thousands of years. You know, we're talking about stuff that's as old as the pyramids here. You know, not you know.
Yeah, we're still talking post-civilization, aren't we?
Well, we're talking pre any kind of recorded history. That's for sure. In many of the cases, not all. But of course they've changed and the interpretations have changed. But one thing I would like to do, you know, in some way, I don't know what, is, you know, also like, you know, like the Egon Ronay Guide to Restaurants, where people go around, you know, they write this book that tells you which are the best restaurants and, they go around and they review them and stuff. You could do a similar sort of thing for stone circles, So the manual, and that would be a great excuse
you
to go and
comment
visit.
on which ones are perfectly circular, can't you?
No, I wouldn't
You give them
comment
a
on
rating.
that. I'd probably give them a rating on how good they are for spirit dance, and what you can learn from each individual one. I mean, they've mentioned a few there. Ones that if you get a chance to move around the UK, some of the ones that I really, really love, I've mentioned already. If a lot of people who visit the UK go to the Lake District, so if you are up there in Cumbria, then Castlereagh is definitely worth a visit. You will not regret going to Castlereagh. If you're down in Cornwall, you've got the Hurlers, where I am. There's Bosquenun further down the peninsula.
Your back garden.
Stannon, Fernacre. My God, well, it's not a circle, mate. It's just 3 standing stones. And you get that as well. They do not have to be circular. They can be in a straight line. Carnac is the great example of that, isn't it? Carnac was one of the most impressive Neolithic monuments in Europe. But it's the same people that built the ones in Cornwall. They weren't different. It's the same group of people who built them. But they built them in straight lines. They didn't build them in circles.
Am I right in saying there's actually a surprising number of stone circles, quote unquote circles?
Yeah, they're not equally.
A lot of small ones just dotted around all over the country.
Yeah, there are. But I mean, they're definitely not equally spread. And I think that probably if you went back far enough, they would be. But I think that the ones that were more in sort of central England, southern England and stuff would have been destroyed a long time ago a lot of them would have been destroyed by the Christians, because obviously those guys got Christianity first. Therefore, they would have seen those things as or built churches on top of them, or used the stones to build their churches, Whereas here in Cornwall and in Cumbria and in Wales and in Scotland, you will find a lot more, because these places got Christianity much later than the rest of England. And so there's been less attrition on them. Also, a lot of them in relatively inaccessible locations. I mean, now you see these things on moorland, but originally there would have been a lot of trees around them. And some of them there still are. So, yeah, so down here, Fernacre, Stannon, and also, if you're in Japan, the best one relatively recently discovered is Oshoro in Hokkaido. And if you're in Mongolia, Uskin Uva, is a place to be heading in Mongolia if you want to see some amazing standing stones. Those ones are really impressive because they've been decorated, obviously, possibly after they were first.
Are they circular again?
No. Well, that's what I was going to say. Is what counts as circular. If you go sort of southish of the Hurlers, you come to southwestish of the Hurlers, you come to a place called Tregarrick Tor, which is another one of these, these features on the landscape. And south of that, just like, the Hurlers are south of the Cheese Ring and so on, south of that, there's an area that it's one of those things. Is this a stone circle or isn't it? Is this natural? It's hard to know because it is vaguely circular. But then again, it looks like it could have been, it could easily have been a natural formation. So is it a stone circle that's been messed around over the years? Is it a stone circle that isn't a stone circle, it's entirely natural? Or is it something in between? And I think there would have been a lot of in-between things. When you create a grove, one of the great joys of doing that is what I try to do is I create something that looks as if it could be entirely natural, happened by chance. And yet it's very, very conducive to, free movement and spirit dance and that type of stuff. So the answer is, I don't know. How uncircular does it have to be before you say, maybe it's not human made,
The reason I'm asking is because it goes back to our whole quote-unquote core shamanism thing. What's interesting is what could be considered what we think of as a stone circle. We find all over the world, and it's just further, I wouldn't say evidence, but whatever you want to call it, just points on the radar that shamanism is or that this is shamanism. These are groves, and these were created for that purpose all over the world without any contact with each other.
But groves would tend to be roughly circular just because of the nature of spirit dance. And nature of other shamanistic things.
I wanted to ask you, because I've got... Sorry, Damon.
But I was just going to say, they wouldn't necessarily be perfectly circular. Yeah. And there could be a lot off circular.
Well, you mentioned the spirit dance. So we have stones around in a irregular or circular pattern around the outside, and then we have a focus in the middle. And it just reminded me of plenty of rituals, shamanic rituals, like where you have maybe something in the middle, like a bonfire or whatever
exactly.
in the middle, and people around the outside. Not necessarily stones, but
exactly.
a circular group of people, and then the shaman is in the middle doing his ritual.
Yeah.
But so I was wondering whether...
Well, you can sure see that with the hurlers, right? Because
right?
the hurlers are wide space. There's plenty of space to put people
massive,
between the hurlers, yeah? And that old legend of people playing hurling and getting turned to stone. So of course, it depends how many people are involved. As I says, you can have multiple people involved in spirit dance, and some of them maybe were standing around the edge in a circle and maybe had like stone person, stone person, stone person, stone person at some point in time going around the ring. You can definitely see how that would be. And then as the shaman moved between them, maybe the person standing between the stones starts to interact with the shaman in some way. Maybe, we've said wrestling can be a spiritual activity. Maybe wrestling, maybe something similar to wrestling. Maybe using a stone being passed between, and so you can see how all these things start to fit together. The whole point is that you want variety in your spirit dance, and spirit dance is not always a solo activity. You can do multiple shamans can be practicing spirit dance. And some of the shrines in Japan that do the old school Shinto version of sumo, you're looking at them and you're thinking, is that a Shinto ritual, or are they actually wrestling? And it's hard to tell. They're don't seem to be purely doing both. And it's us and our desire to put these things into little boxes and say, okay, wrestling is part of normal life and spiritual life is something separate from that. That's a Christian idea, That's a modern exoteric, not necessarily Christian, could be Buddhist, could be one of these put things in little boxes religions. It's not a shamanistic idea. Shamanism sees life holistically. It's not like that. You don't have, going to churches is religious, but playing football isn't. Shamanism doesn't see the world like that. It sees the world as whether you're religious or not is not to do with where you go and the exact activities you undertake. It's to do with your attitude and your approach to those activities. Are you continually putting yourself in a position where you're trying to learn and gain feedback directly from nature, in which case, irrespective of what the activity is, it's shamanism? Or are you cutting yourself off from nature, having your own ideas and inventing your own imagination about how the world is, in which case it's not shamanism, but the actual activity itself doesn't matter. And I think that's a big, difficult thing for people to understand when they look at, for instance, stone circles are a great example. What were they originally? And then what did they become? You have, they obviously at some point in time got associated with funerary rites, and eschatology and the developing theology of these religions as they became more and more exoteric and became less and less esoteric. I don't think there was an exact sort of tip over date in any given area of the world. I think it was shades of grey all the way. But obviously it did happen at different points in the world at different times. And, but to me, in living in these isles, this is our heritage, right? This is this land is, I'm just talking about the country of the United Kingdom, because obviously countries are a modern idea as well. I just mean this land that we live in has this kind of heritage to it, and other areas of the world do too. But stone circles, in my opinion, are one of the most wonderful things in life, along with the sea and the shore and, the mountains and the rivers and all that kind of stuff. They're probably the most wonderful man-made things that I've come across. And that's why, that's what I was talking about, this unboxing stone circles idea, That would be a big cardboard box, wouldn't it?
It would be a massive one.
Yeah.
So we talked about at the beginning stone circles and how it potentially relates to the new year, stars and the calendar and all that. Is there anything to explore?
Yeah. I think that was a later thing. Obviously, shamans want to. This is about astrology and stuff. I mean, it's a heretics channel thing and we will go into. I think we have done already. We did a bunch of episodes on Mithraism and Rosicrucianism and stuff. But to cut a long story short, shamanism does have this idea that you want to put yourself in a position where you're learning directly from nature. Once people got agriculture and became civilized and they were settled in certain locations, they, rather than moving around all the time as hunter-gatherers do, they wanted, and they had agriculture especially, they wanted to start tracking the seasons more closely. They wanted to predict when to plant the crops and all this kind of stuff. And the stone circle is an ideal device to do that, especially if you stick in an extra stone that acts as sort of an alignment point. And you could say that when such and such a star rises over the third stone from the left, as sighted along the heel stone or the viewing stone, or for instance at the hurlers it would be the pipers, then a certain time of year has been reached and it's time to plant the seeds. And so a lot of these things are associated with the new year and then the spring. And hurling happened a lot in modern times in the springtime. So yes, but again, that's part of the move towards exotericism is starting to track the stuff that's happening in the heavens and view it in an exoteric way. You know, when all the stars are in alignment, then we will have a good crops and stuff like that. That's when the whole stuff starts being woo-woo in an exoteric sense, and it's time for shamans to pack up shop and go and find another line of work, you know. But they did, and a lot of them obviously they get into that, and then you can say that they became observatories at that point in time, and clearly they were. But my point is that's not their original use.
Yeah, because that's a theory that's floating around, isn't it? They were.
No, I think it's certain. I think it's fairly certain that they were used for that at some points in time, but I don't believe that they were used for that when they were created.
Mm.
And that's not necessarily when they were stone. I mean, they may have been used for that when they were made out of stone. I mean, when there were trees and posts and you know, other things. Mm. But yeah, we're fortunate. I mean, there's so many. I sound like an ad for the Cornwall Tourist Board, don't you? They don't give me any money. But we do have on Bodmin, we have a thing called Dark Skies, where they're not allowed to have street lighting in the night. So it's a great place for anybody into astronomy or astrology or anything like that. It's a great place to go because you don't get that sodium light haze in the atmosphere that you get in other areas. For instance, in Leeds, try being an astronomer in Leeds or Huddersfield or somewhere. So it's tough, yeah. So it's very, very, you get very, very fine views of the Milky Way and the sky and all this kind of stuff. And in a shamanistic sense, when you're doing your spirit dance in the pitch black in the night, we have clear skies and you're moving between the stones.
And there's the stars above.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is something that's really missing. You know, there's a feeling you get a humbled feeling you get.
Humbled and uplifted at the same time.
When you just witness the sky full of stars. And it's something that's really lost. Very few people get to witness that right now.
Yeah, well, mate, we can do it here. This is why do you think I moved here? You should move down here. I keep telling you this.
Yeah, I know. Eventually. All right, Damon. Well, I think we've covered everything there that we wanted to cover.
Yeah, for sure.
This was meant to be the New Year episode, so I think we've done a pretty good job. I'm pretty pleased with that. So should we leave it there?
Yeah, let's do that, mate. That's all right. Okay. Well, we may do Standing Stones Part 2, because we haven't done the dolmens and the menhirs and all that kind of stuff. There are other stone structures that were created by these people long ago. There's one near here, Trethivi Coit, which is an amazing thing. We'll probably do a whole episode on that. So that there are other things to talk about, barrows and all that kind of stuff.
These are groves and these are not circles, because that was one thing that I was wondering. It's like, why would it be a circle? You know, we've talked about that it's not necessarily.
Well, I've talked about why it's a circle.
But why isn't it just a random bunch of?
Well, sometimes stones, it is. You need to go to Karnak, mate. Sometimes it is a fairly random bunch of stones on long lines or whatever. But no, I'm talking about actual structures. So Trethivi Coit's more like a room It's more like a house made out of these enormous blocks of stone. And you think, how on earth did those people? I mean, it has a roof on it that's just weighs. I don't know. I hate to think how many tons it weighs. How did they do that? With only stone tools. How did they do that? And it's quite a phenomenal thing. So we could talk about stuff like that on another one, I think. But let's draw a line under stone circles and do something else in the next one, mate.
Well, we're going to get back practical, aren't we? We're going to be into the Armabella that we've been teasing for a while.
Yes, for sure. We said we're going to do and then, Rock, Jet and Ice. We got 3 episodes.
But rest assured that is back to being practical. So,
oh, for sure it is.
I can vouch for that. So I'm looking forward to that one. Thanks for listening, guys. You can support us again at patreon.com/wovenenergy. You can see the perks you'll get if you go and support us over there. You can head to wovenenergy.com/start-here for your get started episode. Damon's a lot more open these days, but often I kind of tease it by saying that I prod Damon a few times in that episode to be a bit more controversial than normal. So it's well worth going and checking out. Thanks a lot, guys, and we'll see you in the next one.
All the best.